Shut the door, Evelyn. You don't know what those men are. She looked at her husband. Then she looked at the window, at the silhouettes of big men standing in the freezing rain, leather-clad, exhausted, one of them pressing a bloody rag against his arm. She turned back to Walter and said the only thing she knew how to say. They're hungry. Then she unlocked the door. If you've ever been judged before anyone even learned your name, this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The night the Hells Angels came to Rosie's lantern began the way most terrible nights do, quietly, and then all at once. Cole Mercer had ridden through worse. He told himself that somewhere around mile marker 47, when the hail started coming down sideways and the temperature dropped 9 degrees in 20 minutes. He'd ridden through the Rockies in February. He'd done the Appalachians in a thunderstorm that shut down 3 interstates. He'd pushed through the Mojave in 110-degree heat with a cracked radiator and half a bottle of water. Cole Mercer did not stop for weather, but this was not weather. This was something else entirely. The hailstorm that hit Route 9 North just outside Barrow County, Montana, didn't come with any warning. No radar spike, no darkening sky. It just appeared a wall of frozen white coming at them from the northwest, like God himself had decided this particular stretch of forgotten highway needed to be erased. Hailstones the size of shooter marbles hammered down on 43 motorcycles moving at 60 miles per hour. Windshields cracked. 2 bikes fishtailed and went down. And then the road itself, already weakened by years of frost heave and zero state maintenance funding, simply gave up. A 20-foot section collapsed into a drainage ditch that had filled to capacity in minutes. Cole put his hand up. Every bike behind him stopped. For a long moment, nobody said anything. 43 men sat on 43 machines and stared at the hole where the road used to be. The hail had slowed to something more like frozen rain. It was still hitting them. Nobody moved. Then Cole heard it. From somewhere behind him in the column. Cole. It was Danny Hayes, Quiet Danny. The one they called Rook because he rarely spoke, and when he did, you moved. Cole turned his bike around and pushed through the column until he found him. Danny was crouched beside a man named Terrence Webb, a big guy, 53 years old, 22 years in the club, who was sitting on the road with his hand pressed against his right forearm. Dark through the rain, too dark. He went down on the gravel shoulder, Danny said. His voice was level. It was always level. Cut his arm on the guardrail. It's not arterial, but it needs closing. Cole crouched down. He pulled out his flashlight and shone it at Terrence's arm. The gash was 3 inches long and deep enough that Cole could see the fascia beneath the skin. Terrence wasn't screaming. He was just sitting there in the frozen rain with that particular stillness that men develop after they've been through enough pain that screaming seems like a waste of energy. "How you feeling, T?" Cole asked. "I've had worse haircuts," Terrence said. Cole stood up. He looked back at the broken road. He looked at the sky. He looked at his fuel gauge, which had been reading a quarter tank for the past 45 minutes. "We need shelter," he said, "not loud, just factual." "There's nothing out here," said a man named Brock, who was the type who always knew how bad things were. "I checked the map before we left Billings. Nothing for 30 miles in either direction." "Maps are wrong," Danny said, still crouched beside Terrence. "Maps aren't wrong. GPS says there's something about 2 miles back," said a younger rider named Marcus, staring at his phone. "Some kind of structure, but the signal's garbage out here. I can barely read it." 2 miles back, and this is nothing," Brock said. "It's 2 miles back," Cole said, "or 30 miles forward on an impassable road with a man bleeding and 40 bikes running in on fumes." He looked at Brock. "You do that math." Nobody argued. Cole Mercer had a way of ending arguments that had nothing to do with volume. They turned around. 2 miles felt like 20. The rain had gone from frozen to just very, very cold, and the wind had picked up from the northwest until it was coming at them almost horizontally. Cole could feel his fingers even through his gloves, which meant he was losing circulation. He flexed his hands on the handlebars every 30 seconds. He counted. It kept him focused. He almost missed it. There was no sign on the road. Or there had been a sign once, but it had been knocked down years ago and nobody had bothered to put it back up. What tipped Cole off was the light, a single amber glow coming from a structure set back about 200 feet from the road, barely visible through the rain and the dark. Cole slowed. The column slowed behind him. He sat there on his bike for a moment, squinting at it. The building was small, old, The kind of structure that had been built when people expected things to last and didn't mind making them that way. There was a covered porch, a hand-painted sign above the door, though he couldn't read it from the road. A pickup truck parked on the side old enough that it still had actual chrome on the bumper. And through one of the front windows, warm yellow light, Cole pulled in. He parked 20 feet from the front steps and killed his engine. One by one, the bikes behind him pulled in and went quiet until the only sound was the rain on the roof of the covered porch and the wind through the tree line to the north. Cole climbed off. He walked to the front door. He could see through the glass an older woman inside behind a counter with white hair pulled back and an apron still on her from what looked like a long night of cooking. She was wiping down the counter. She hadn't seen them yet. He knocked. She looked up. For a moment, she just stood there looking at him through the glass. Cole knew exactly what she was seeing. 6'2", 230 pounds, gray beard, leather vest with patches that said things people recognized whether they wanted to or not. Rain dripping off him. Not exactly the person you wanted to see knocking on your door at 11:30 on a February night. Her hand moved. Cole watched it, expecting the deadbolt, expecting the lights to go off, expecting what always happened in every town on every night like this one. Instead, she unlocked the door and opened it. "Good Lord," she said, looking past him at the line of bikes in her lot. "How many of you are there?" 43, Cole said. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Is anyone hurt?" Cole blinked. "One man, arm laceration. He needs—" "Bring him in first," she said. "Then everybody else. I'll start the stove." Cole stood very still. "Ma'am," he said, "you understand who we are." She looked at him directly. Her eyes were blue and very clear and completely unafraid. "I understand you're standing in the rain," she said. "Now bring your man inside before he catches something worse than a cut arm." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen. Cole stood in the doorway for 3 more seconds. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened to him. Couldn't remember the last time a door had opened. He turned back to the column of men behind him, most of whom had been watching. "Rook," he called. "Bring Terrence." Her name was Evelyn Carter. She told them that while she was pulling a first aid kit from under the counter, a real one, not a drugstore kit, the kind that had rolls of gauze and actual suture strips and antiseptic solution in a brown glass bottle. "You a nurse?" Danny asked, watching her work on Terrence's arm with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this before. "Farmer's wife for 41 years, she said. "You learn." She pressed a strip of wound closure tape across the gash, then another, then wrapped it clean. "That'll hold until you can get him to a doctor. He'll need a few stitches if the swelling doesn't close it on its own." Terrence looked at his arm, then at her. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me after you eat something." The other men had filed in, slowly filling the small dining room in a way that should have felt threatening but somehow didn't. They were wet and exhausted, and they moved carefully like men who understood they were guests in someone's space and were trying not to break anything. A few of them pulled off their wet outer gear and laid it over the backs of chairs. Someone found a stack of dish towels on the counter and passed them around without being asked. Cole watched all of this from a stool at the far end of the counter. He was watching the kitchen doorway where Evelyn had disappeared after finishing with Terrence's arm. He could hear sounds, gas jets clicking on heavy pots being moved, water running. An old man appeared from a back hallway. He was tall but thin in the way age makes men thin, and he walked with a slight tremor in his hands that he seemed to be managing by keeping them in the pockets of his flannel shirt. He had a white crew cut and the kind of face that had been weathered by decades of outdoor work, not old exactly, more like geological. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the room full of bikers. Nobody said anything. The old man looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him. "I'm Walter," the old man said. "Cole." Walter nodded once. "My wife feeding you." "She is?" "Then you're fed," Walter said, as if that settled something. He crossed the room, took a stool 3 seats from Cole, and poured himself a cup of coffee from the carafe on the counter. His hands shook a little when he lifted the cup, but he didn't spill it. Cole watched him. "We're not going to be any trouble," Cole said. Walter looked at him over the rim of his cup. "Didn't think you were." "Most people think we are." "Most people," Walter said carefully, "have never been in a real storm." Cole didn't respond to that. He just sat with it for a moment because it felt like something that deserved sitting with. Evelyn made beef stew. Cole didn't know how she did it that fast. Later, Danny would figure out she must have had a batch already going in the back, something she'd been simmering all day, for her own dinner, and she just kept adding to it. Potatoes, canned tomatoes, whatever she had. She made enough for 43 men, and she did it without once asking for help, though when Marcus, the youngest of the group, 27 years old, and the son of a club veteran, got up and walked to the kitchen doorway and said, "Ma'am, can I do anything?" She handed him a stack of bowls without a word and pointed at the serving counter. The men ate. Some of them hadn't eaten since morning. The stew was exactly the kind of food that people describe as simple but mean, as a kind of reverence, thick, heavy, seasoned in a way that came from knowing rather than measuring. Black coffee, real cream from an actual pitcher, bread that was a day old but still had softness in the middle when you tore it apart. Cole sat at the counter and ate slowly. He watched his men. He watched the room. This was the thing about Cole Mercer that most people never understood, and it was the thing that had kept him at the front of the column for 22 years. He watched. He noticed things, not because he was suspicious of them, but because the world communicated information constantly, and most people were too busy performing their own feelings to receive it. He noticed the crack in the ceiling above the far booth that had been patched with what looked like drywall compound applied by hand more than once because there were multiple layers visible. He noticed the yellow water stain around it that was fresh probably from tonight's storm. He noticed the industrial heater in the corner that was running at maximum and still losing the battle against the cold that crept through the walls. He noticed the front window with the plastic sheeting taped over the lower left corner where the glass had cracked and not been replaced. He noticed all of it, and he filed it away and he kept eating. Evelyn came out from the kitchen and stood behind the counter refilling coffee. She moved around the room with a naturalness that struck Cole as remarkable. 43 leather-clad bikers in her dining room in the middle of the night, and she moved among them like it was a Tuesday morning rush. "You live here alone?" Cole asked. "You and your husband?" "Mostly," she said. "Our daughter's in Missoula. She comes up summers." "The place is yours. You own it outright." Something shifted in Evelyn's expression. "Not much, just a small tightening around the eyes." "We have for 37 years, she said. And then she moved on to refill someone else's coffee, and Cole let it go. But he had heard it. Have for 37 years, not do. Have. Past tense wearing present tense clothing. He picked up his coffee cup and looked at Walter, who was sitting 2 stools down, now turned slightly so he could see the room. The old man's eyes were moving over the crowd of bikers with an expression Cole had seen before. Not fear, not hostility, something more like recognition. The particular look of a man who has been in rooms with dangerous people before and has made peace with what that means. "You military?" Cole asked. Walter didn't look at him right away. Then he did. "Marines," he said, 68 and 69. "Vietnam." "Yes." Cole nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment. He had his own history with that generation, complicated, knotted up in the kind of family mythology that gets passed down in some families, like other families, passed down recipes. His own father had come back from Vietnam, a different person than the one who left according to his mother. Cole had never met the before version. "Thank you for your service," Cole said. He meant it the way men say it when they mean it quietly without ceremony. Walter looked at him for a moment. "You too," he said, and something in his tone said he knew, though Cole hadn't said anything. Cole said nothing. He turned back to his coffee. Behind him, the rain kept hitting the windows. The heater kept running. 42 men ate stew and talked in low voices, and the night moved on outside without them. And Cole Mercer sat at the counter of a dying diner and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt like he was somewhere he was supposed to be. It was around 1 in the morning when Marcus came back from the restroom and stopped in the hallway, and Cole noticed him stop and looked to see why. Marcus was staring at something on the wall beside the kitchen door. He was young enough that his face still showed everything before he could decide whether to show it. Cole got up and walked over. On the wall was a community corkboard, the kind that small-town businesses keep local business cards missing, dog flyers, church event announcements. And in the center of it, pinned not carefully, but with the urgent imprecision of someone who had put it there fast and not looked at it again, was a folded document. Cole recognized the letterhead. He'd seen it before, not on his own behalf, but on behalf of other people. People he knew, people who'd gone through hard years. It was from a bank, Specifically, it was a notice of intent to foreclose. The date on it was 6 weeks ago. The response deadline was 31 days from today. Cole looked at the notice. He looked at the wall around it, at the church flyers and the business cards and the lost dog poster that was so old the edges had curled brown. He looked at Marcus, who was still standing there with that readable young face. "Go back to the table," Cole said quietly. Marcus went. Cole stood there alone in the hallway and read the document twice. The numbers on it were not large, not by any standard that Cole moved in, but they were clearly insurmountable to two people running a diner in a dying town at the end of a frozen highway in the middle of February. He folded it back along its original crease lines and pinned it exactly where it had been. Then he walked back to his stool and sat down and finished his coffee, and did not sleep at all that night. The storm didn't break until nearly 4 in the morning. By then, most of the men had drifted off, some in booths, some on the floor near the heater. A few had gone back outside to their bikes and slept in their gear rather than impose further. Evelyn had finally sat down at a small table near the kitchen door, her feet up on a chair across from her, dozing with a dish towel still in her hands. Walter had gone to bed around 2. Cole sat at the counter alone. He had a habit developed over years of running a large organization that other people had a way of wanting to destroy, of thinking in terms of problems and their solutions. He was not a sentimental man. He had not survived 22 years of what he'd survived by being sentimental, but he was a thorough man. He was a man who, once he identified a problem, could not unknow it. The crack in the ceiling, the patched foundation, the plastic over the window, the heater losing the fight, the foreclosure notice on a corkboard in the hallway, an old woman with clear blue eyes who opened her door without hesitation, an old man with trembling hands who had said "you too" without being asked. Cole turned his coffee cup in his hands. Outside, the rain had stopped. The highway would be closed until the county sent someone to deal with the collapsed section, which meant they weren't going anywhere until morning at the earliest. He had time. He used it the way he always used time he wasn't expecting, he planned. Not a big plan, not yet, just the beginning of one. Just the first question, the only first question, the one everything else depended on. What would it take? He sat in the silence of Rosie's lantern, while 42 sleeping men breathed around him, and an old woman dozed near her kitchen door, and he thought about what it would take, and the number that came to him was not as large as most people would expect. The second thought that came to him was this: he knew a lot of people. And the third thought was the one that kept him at the counter until the gray light of pre-dawn started showing through the front windows. The thought was simple, and it was old, and it came from a place in him that he had spent a long time trying to find again after he had lost it. I owe this, not to these people specifically, to something older than them, something that had happened to him a long time ago, on a night not entirely unlike this one, when he had been young and broken and very, very cold, and a door had opened. He owed it, and he was finally, after all these years, in a position to pay. The gray light of early morning came through the front windows of Rosie's lantern, the way it always does in Montana in February, slow, reluctant, like even the sun didn't want to deal with what the night had left behind. Cole was still on his stool. He hadn't moved in 3 hours. His fourth cup of coffee had gone cold beside him, and he hadn't touched it. Around him, men were starting to wake up. The sounds were familiar, the grunt of someone stiff from sleeping on a hard surface, the creak of a booth, a cough, the shuffle of boots. Marcus was the first one fully upright, because Marcus was always the first one fully upright, and he immediately started folding his jacket, with the precise care of someone raised to leave places the way he found them. Danny Hayes was awake too, sitting against the far wall with his knees up, watching the room come back to life with those quiet, dark eyes of his. Danny hadn't slept much either. Cole could always tell. Evelyn appeared from the kitchen at 6:15 exactly. She was wearing a fresh apron and her hair was pinned back, and there was no evidence on her face that she had spent the night dozing in a chair. She moved behind the counter with the automatic efficiency of someone who had opened this diner at this hour every day for decades, and she started a fresh pot of coffee before she said a single word to anyone. "There's eggs," she announced to the room, "and bread. It won't be fancy, but it'll be hot." A few of the men looked at each other. One of them, a barrel-chested man named Phil, who everyone called Freight, cleared his throat and said, "Ma'am, you don't have to do that." Evelyn looked at him. "I know I don't," she said simply, and went back into the kitchen. Freight looked at Cole. Cole said nothing. He just picked up his cold coffee and took a sip of it like it was still warm because the coffee wasn't what he was thinking about. Walter came out from the back hallway at 6:30, already dressed flannel shirt, buttoned to the collar, those trembling hands tucked into his pockets the way Cole had noticed the night before. He went straight to the coffee pot, poured a cup, and leaned against the counter without making a production of any of it. He looked around the room at the bikers in various states of wakefulness, and he nodded at a couple of them, and they nodded back, and that was that. Cole watched him. He had been watching him in his mind all night, turning the pieces over. The tremor in his hands, the way he walked, not a limp exactly, more like a managed thing, a body negotiating with itself. The eyes that recognized rooms full of difficult men because he'd been in them before. Vietnam, 1968 and 1969. Cole knew enough history to know what that meant, what those 2 years specifically meant. Sleep anyone? Walter asked, not looking at him. No, Cole said. Me neither most nights, Walter said. He drank his coffee. Gets quieter after a while. The not sleeping. Cole turned that sentence around in his head. Then he said, How long you had this place? 37 years come April. Walter said it the way men say things they've counted carefully. Good years. Walter was quiet for long enough that it became an answer before he spoke. Some years were good, he said finally. Some years were the other thing. The other thing, Cole repeated. Medical bills, drought, the highway rewrote. Walter set his cup down. When they moved the state road 8 miles east in 2019, we lost about 60% of our through traffic overnight. We'd been counting on that traffic for 20 years. He said it without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. You can't rebuild 20 years of infrastructure in the time they give you. Cole looked at him directly. What kind of time are they giving you? Walter met his eyes. Something passed between them, the recognition of two men who were both accustomed to saying hard things plainly. 31 days as of yesterday, Walter said. Then he picked up his coffee cup again. Give or take. Cole didn't react. He just nodded once slowly, because he'd already known. He'd already done that math alone at a counter at 2 in the morning while everyone slept. He just needed to hear Walter say it out loud to know that Walter knew he knew. She doesn't know I saw the notice, Cole said. Walter looked at him. A flicker of something crossed his face. I figured you probably did. You're not the kind of man who misses things. He paused. Please don't tell her you know. She's already carrying enough. I won't, Cole said. And he meant it. And Walter seemed to understand that he meant it because he gave a single short nod, and that was the end of the conversation, and neither of them brought it up again that morning. But Cole was already 3 steps ahead. He always was. The eggs came out. 43 men ate scrambled eggs and toast and drank coffee in a small diner on a forgotten highway and talked and occasionally laughed, and Evelyn refilled cups and Walter sat at the counter, and the morning moved forward the way mornings do, indifferent to whatever was coming. It was around 7:45 when the door opened. Cole heard it before he turned around the creak of the hinges and the cold air coming in from outside. He turned on his stool and saw the man in the doorway. Late 50s, gray uniform, sheriff's department patch on the shoulder. The kind of face that had decided things about people before it got close enough to know anything about them. The sheriff stood in the doorway and looked at the room for a long moment. His eyes moved across the leather vests, the patches, the big men filling every booth, and most of the floor space. His hand was on his belt, not on his weapon, but near it, the way men stand when they want you to notice the option without committing to it. Evelyn, he said. His voice was loud enough to fill the room even though he didn't raise it. You want to tell me what's going on here? Evelyn came out from the kitchen doorway. She wiped her hands on her apron and stood behind the counter and looked at the sheriff the way she had looked at Cole through the glass the night before, directly, unafraid, and with a patience that was its own kind of authority. Good morning, Roy, she said. Don't good morning me, he said. I've had 3 calls this morning from people who saw 40-something motorcycles parked at your place. 3 calls, Evelyn. Then I'm glad I had enough eggs, she said. A few of the bikers exchanged looks, not threatening looks, more like the looks men give each other when they're impressed by something unexpected. The sheriff stepped fully inside and let the door close behind him. He was looking at Cole now, specifically the way men in his position always eventually settled on the biggest, most decorated presence in the room. Who are you? He asked. Cole turned on his stool to face him fully. Cole Mercer, he said. He didn't stand up not because he was being disrespectful, but because he had found over the years that standing up in situations like this was the one thing that actually made them escalate. Sitting said, "I'm not here for you." Standing said something else entirely. "We got caught in last night's storm. The road collapsed on 9 North about 2 miles up. Mrs. Carter was kind enough to give us shelter." "Mrs. Carter," the sheriff said, and there was something in the way he said it that was pointed in a direction Cole didn't like, "is not always the best judge of who she should be letting into her establishment." The room went very quiet, not the quiet of men shrinking, the quiet of men deciding. Cole said evenly, "She served us food, Sheriff. We ate it. Nobody's been anything but grateful." "I'm sure." The sheriff looked at Evelyn. "I need to speak with you privately." "You can say what you need to say here," Evelyn said. "These are my guests." The sheriff stared at her. Then he looked at the room again, recalculating. He was not a stupid man, Cole could see that. He understood the room. He understood that what he said next was going to be heard by 43 people, and he adjusted accordingly. His voice dropped. "Evelyn, people like this don't just pass through. You understand me? I've seen this before. They find a vulnerable situation and Roy?" Her voice was quiet, but it cut him off completely. "These men were standing in a hailstorm with one of them bleeding. I let them in. That is the beginning and the end of it." She paused. "And if you have something else to say about that, I'd like you to say it outside." Nobody moved. The sheriff held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked at Cole one more time, the specific look of a man who is accustomed to having the last word and is currently not having it. He pointed not at Cole but at the general room and said, "I'll be watching." Then he turned and walked out. The door closed. For 3 full seconds, absolute silence. Then Freight from his booth in the corner said quietly, "I like her." Half the room exhaled in something that was halfway between a laugh and a breath of relief, and the tension broke like a string that had been pulled too tight and the morning went on. Cole turned back to his coffee. Danny was beside him now, having moved from the wall to the stool next to Cole during the confrontation. He hadn't said a word during any of it, but that was Danny. "You noticed the pipes," Danny said quietly. Cole glanced at him. "What pipes?" "Kitchen. She's been running hot water from the left tap only. The right one's been off since we got here, and there's frost on the inside of the window above the sink." He paused. "The main heating pipe to the back of the building is frozen, maybe broken. I can hear the boiler running, but nothing circulating to the back rooms." Cole absorbed this. He thought about Walter walking stiffly from the back hallway every morning, about how Evelyn had kept the kitchen door closed all night, about the temperature differential he'd felt every time that door opened. "They've been living in the front of the building," Cole said. "Since at least December, I'd guess," Danny said. Cole was quiet. He picked up his coffee. He set it back down. He did what he always did when pieces were falling into place, in a direction that required him to do something. He went very still and let the whole picture develop. Frozen pipes in the back, a roof with active water damage, a heating system running at capacity and failing, a window with plastic taped over cracked glass, a foreclosure notice 31 days from execution, 2 people in their 70s running this place alone in the middle of Montana in February. He turned to Danny. "How long would the pipe repair take you?" Danny considered this with the same level calm he applied to everything. "Depends on where it's broken. If it's just frozen a few hours with the right heat source. If it's cracked through the wall, that's a different conversation." "What would you need?" "Access to the crawl space, a heat gun, pipe repair kit if it's cracked." He paused. "And someone to tell the old man before I go poking around under his house." Cole nodded. He got off his stool. He walked to where Walter was sitting at the end of the counter, reading a tattered newspaper with the focused attention of a man who was pretending to read a newspaper. "Walter," Cole said. Walter looked up. "My man Danny is a plumber, former Marine. He's going to go look at your heating pipes in the crawl space if that's all right with you." Walter stared at him. Something moved across the old man's face, a sequence of expressions that happened too fast to name individually but collectively said, "Pride fighting with need and need slowly winning." "I don't require charity," Walter said. The way he said it wasn't angry, it was careful, like a man who had said that sentence before and meant it every time and still meant it now, even though it was costing him. Cole looked at him steadily. "I know you don't," he said. And this isn't charity. My man saw a problem. He fixes problems. That's who he is. It doesn't have anything to do with requiring anything. He paused. You going to tell a Marine he can't fix a pipe? Walter's jaw moved slightly. It might have been suppressing something. Crawlspace door is on the east side of the building, he said. Latch sticks. You have to lift and turn at the same time. Cole looked at Danny. Danny was already putting on his jacket. It took Danny Hayes 40 minutes to find the break. It was in the main supply line 2 feet into the east wall cavity, where a joint had separated not from the cold alone, but from age and the cold together, the slow weakening of old copper, until the pressure finally won. He came back inside and told Cole and Walter both, which was a decision Cole noted and respected. He laid it out plainly the joint needed replacing, which required a piece of half-inch copper pipe and a coupling in a torch kit. He could do it in 2 hours if they had the parts. Nearest hardware store, Walter said, is 40 miles. I know where to get parts, Danny said. He looked at Cole. Cole pulled out his phone. The signal was 1 bar barely, but it was enough. He made a call. The call lasted 4 minutes. When he hung up, he said to Walter, parts will be here in 90 minutes. Walter looked at him. From where? From a man who owes me a favor, Cole said. And before you say anything, the man owes me the favor, not you. It costs you nothing. It cost me nothing. It cost Danny about 2 hours of his time, which he is giving freely because that is the kind of man he is. Walter was quiet for a long time, long enough that Evelyn appeared from the kitchen and looked at her husband's face and then at Cole's face and said, what's happening? Nothing yet, Cole said. Something soon. Evelyn looked at Walter. Walter looked at his hands. Then he looked up at Cole and said the thing that Cole had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting for it. My father used to say that the hardest thing a man can do is let someone help him. Mine too, Cole said. Walter nodded, once, slowly. All right, he said. That was all he said. But it was everything. Danny got his parts. He was under the building with Marcus helping from outside before the morning was half gone. Cole heard the torch going. He heard the careful, methodical sounds of a man who knew exactly what he was doing it. Evelyn came to the kitchen door and listened and didn't say anything. Her face did the saying, that tight around the eyes expression, loosening just slightly, just enough. The other men had moved outside by then. Not because anyone told them to, but because men who don't have enough to do tend to find things to do, and the daylight had revealed the exterior of the building in detail that the darkness had hidden. Brock was standing under the roof overhang, looking up at the eave line. Freight was running his hand along the foundation at the northeast corner, pressing on the mortar between the stones. A man named Cesar had climbed onto the cab of Walter's old pickup and was looking at the roof from that vantage point, and what he saw made him climb back down and go find Cole. The northeast corner of the roof, Caesar said. 4 or 5 sections of the ridge cap are either missing or broken. That's where the waters have been getting in. It's been getting in for a while. You can see the staining on the fascia board. Cole nodded. There's more, Caesar said. He was a quiet man who chose his sentences carefully. The foundation on the east side has a crack, horizontal, maybe 18 inches long. It's not structural yet, but in 3 more freeze-thaw cycles it will be. Cole took this in, the roof, the foundation, the pipes, the heating, the window, the money. He thought about the foreclosure notice on the corkboard. He thought about the bank's 31-day clock. He thought about a number. He ran the number in his head, materials labor donated time. He had built enough things to know what things cost when you stripped out the contractor markup and the bureaucratic overhead and just counted real parts in real hands. The number was not small, but it was possible. He looked at Cesar. How many men do you know who can do roof work? Caesar almost smiled. In our chapters combined, probably 30-40. Half of them did construction at some point. And foundation repair. I've done it myself, Caesar said, twice. Cole nodded slowly. He was already moving. Not physically, he was still standing in the same spot, but the planning had shifted into the next gear, the one that came after considering, and before deciding, the one that was really just the beginning of deciding. Make me a list, Cole said. Materials, all of it, everything you've seen, everything the other guys have seen, roof foundation, pipes, heating, windows, everything. Cesar looked at him. You're serious. When am I not serious? Caesar didn't answer that. He took out his phone and started the list. Cole turned and went back inside. He sat back down at the counter. He sat there in the particular stillness he used when he was doing the kind of thinking that had to be done alone, and he ran through it all again from the beginning. The logistics, the people, the timeline, the 31 days. He thought about the sheriff's face when he'd walked out the door, the pointing finger. I'll be watching. Good, Cole thought. Watch. He thought about Walter saying 31 days as of yesterday in that flat, careful voice. He thought about Evelyn moving through a room of 43 men with nothing in her hands but a coffee pot and nothing on her face but welcome. He thought about the night a long time ago when he had been 24 years old and freshly out of the army and sleeping under an overpass in Knoxville, Tennessee, in the middle of January with nothing between him and the cold but a jacket that had seen better days. He thought about the woman who had come out of the diner on the corner, small place, nothing fancy, neon sign that buzzed when the wind hit it, and handed him a bag with 2 containers of soup and a sleeve of crackers, and said without looking at him, in the pitying way he'd grown to hate, "There's more if you need it." Just that, there's more if you need it. He had never found out her name. He had gone back the next day and the day after that, and she had fed him both times, and on the 4th day he had found work with a construction crew, and the week after that he had a room to sleep in. He had gone back to thank her 6 months later, and the diner was closed. Permanently. Windows soaped over. The sign still there, but dark. He had thought about her more times than he could count over the 22 years since. He picked up his phone. He called a man named Big Roy, who ran the Billings chapter, and told him what he needed and when. Then he called a man named Santos in Great Falls. Then he called 3 more men in 3 more cities and gave them the same information. He was brief and specific because brief and specific was how you actually got things done when you needed things done fast. When he put the phone down, Marcus was standing nearby pretending to look at something else. Cole looked at him. Marcus looked back. "What are you telling them?" Marcus asked. "To come," Cole said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "All of them. As many as can make it in 3 days." Cole picked up his cold coffee and looked at it. "We're not done here, Marcus." Marcus looked at the front of the diner, then at Cole. "Does she know?" he asked. Cole shook his head. "Does he know?" "He knows something," Cole said. "He doesn't know the size of it yet." Marcus stood there with the expression of someone who had just been handed a piece of information too large to process quickly. Then something crossed his young face, something uncomplicated, which was unusual in Cole's world. Something that was just plainly glad. He nodded once and walked away, and Cole watched him go and thought about how that was the other thing about being 27 that he missed most about being 27. The way everything still felt like it could be fixed. And then he caught himself and thought maybe it can. From under the building came the sound of Danny Hayes beginning to seal the pipe. And from the kitchen came the sound of Evelyn Carter beginning to cook again, because that was what she did, because that was who she was. And Walter sat at the end of the counter with his trembling hands wrapped around a coffee cup and stared at a newspaper he was not reading. And Cole watched him from across the room and thought about 31 days and began to count backward. 3 days passed. Walter counted them the way he counted everything now, carefully against his will, aware of the number behind the number. 28 days left on the foreclosure notice. 27, 26. He didn't look at the corkboard anymore. He didn't need to. The number lived in him the way old injuries live in the body, quiet most of the time, but there the moment you stopped moving. The bikers had left for the morning after the storm, once the county road crew had patched the collapsed section of Route 9 well enough to pass. They'd gone out one by one and started their bikes in the cold, and the sound of 43 engines turning over in sequence had filled the valley like something prehistoric. Walter had stood on the porch and watched them go. Cole had been the last one to leave. He'd come back inside, paid for every meal in cash, far too much pressed into Evelyn's hand before she could object, shaken Walter's hand once firmly, and walked out without making any promises. Walter had respected that. Men who made promises when they were leaving were usually not the ones who kept them. So he had gone back inside and gone back to work, and Evelyn had gone back to the kitchen, and the diner had gone on being what it had always been, a small place, doing its best at the edge of something larger than it could hold. Danny's pipe repair held. The heat came back to the rear of the building for the first time in 2 months, and Evelyn had stood in the back hallway and just breathed the warm air for a full minute without saying anything. Walter had pretended not to see that because seeing it would have required him to acknowledge what she'd been enduring and for how long, and he wasn't ready to carry that on top of everything else. On the second day after the bikers left, a man from the bank called. He was professional and impersonal, and he used words like timeline and remediation window and outstanding obligation in a voice that suggested he used those words 20 times a day, and they meant nothing to him personally. Walter told him he understood the situation. The man said he was glad to hear that and asked if Walter had any questions. Walter said no. The man said thank you for your time and hung up. Walter sat by the phone for a while after that. On the third morning, Evelyn found him in the kitchen at 5:30, sitting at the small table where they ate their own meals, with a yellow legal pad in front of him, covered in columns of numbers. She looked at the numbers. She looked at his face. She sat down across from him and didn't say anything, which was the thing he loved most about her. She knew when silence was what was needed. I've been through it 6 ways, Walter said. I know, she said. There isn't a 7th way that works. I know that too. He looked at her. We built something real here, Evelyn. We did, she said. I don't know how to. He stopped. His hands were trembling more than usual, which happened when he was angry, and he was angry now at everything and nothing, at the bank and the drought and the rerouted highway and his own body in 26 days. I don't know how to walk away from it. Evelyn reached across the table and put her hand over his trembling ones. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said quietly and without drama, We're not gone yet, Walter. He looked at her hands on his. He didn't answer. And that was when they heard it. At first, it was just a vibration, the kind of thing you feel before you hear it, a low-frequency hum that you'd mistake for a truck on the highway if it stayed steady. But it didn't stay steady. It built, and it multiplied, and it got closer. Walter stood up from the table. He walked to the front of the diner. He looked through the window, and he stood very still. Because coming on Route 9, the patched and reopened Route 9, the forgotten highway that nobody used anymore, was a line of motorcycles, not 43 more. The line stretched back further than he could see headlights, moving through the early morning cold like a procession that had no visible beginning. His mouth opened. He said nothing. Behind him, Evelyn had come to stand in the kitchen doorway. She had a dish towel in her hands, and she stopped moving it completely when she looked past him through the window. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. Walter, how many is that? I can't tell, he said. I can't see the end of it. The motorcycles pulled off the highway and into the lot in a steady, continuous stream that seemed like it would never stop. And behind them, pulling in along the road shoulder, were pickup trucks, work trucks, flatbeds with lumber stacked and strapped under tarps, a truck with a generator on the bed, another with what looked like a full load of roofing material, bundles of shingles, ridge caps, underlayment rolls. 2 more flatbeds with toolboxes the size of small rooms bolted to the truck beds. Walter pushed the front door open and walked out onto the porch. The first bike to park was Cole's. He climbed off, pulled off his helmet, ran a hand through his gray hair, and looked up at Walter on the porch with an expression that was completely unreadable for a moment, and then settled into something simple. Not pride exactly, more like a rival, like a man who had been traveling towards something for a very long time and had finally reached it. You're back, Walter said. It was not a profound thing to say, but it was all he had. I said I had unfinished business, Cole said. Walter stared at him. You never said that. I thought it. Cole looked at the line of trucks still pulling in. Close enough. By the time the last truck parked, there were 61 motorcycles in that lot and 11 work trucks. Men were climbing out, unstrapping tarps, pulling on work gloves, passing tools hand to hand with the organized efficiency of people who had been briefed before they arrived. Cole had made sure of that, had spent the entire previous day on the phone, making sure that everyone who came knew why they were coming and what they were doing, and that it was going to be done right. Evelyn came out onto the porch. She stood beside Walter and looked at all of it. Her hand came up and covered her mouth. Cole walked up the porch steps and stood in front of them both. He looked at Evelyn, first then Walter. I'm going to ask you to trust me, he said. Not because I've earned it, because there isn't time to earn it and there's work to do. Walter's jaw was working. Cole, I need your answer before the argument, Cole said. Not unkindly, just directly. Yes or no? Walter looked at his wife. Evelyn was still looking at the lot, at the men and the trucks and the lumber. There were tears on her face, but her expression was not sad. It was something else, something that didn't have a clean name, that lived in the territory between overwhelmed and grateful and not quite willing to believe yet. Yes, Walter said. Cole nodded. He turned to the lot and raised his hand once. The work began. It began fast. Cole had organized it the way he organized everything, by who knew what, not by who was senior. Cesar had done foundation repair twice, and he went straight to the northeast corner with two men Cole trusted with masonry. Brock, who'd spent 8 years framing houses in Colorado before he joined the chapter, took 4 men up onto the roof with the first load of shingles and started pulling the damaged ridge section before the morning was an hour old. Danny was back under the building before anyone asked him to be, this time with 2 additional men checking every pipe and joint in the crawl space. Not just the broken ones, all of them, because if one had failed, then the rest were candidates. A man named Earl, who nobody had introduced to Walter and who turned out to have 23 years as an electrician, found the wiring problem in the back storage room that had been tripping the circuit breaker since October and fixed it in 40 minutes. A man named Luis, who was built like a defensive tackle and talked like an accountant, spent the first hour measuring the cracked window frame and then disappeared in his truck and came back 2 hours later with a replacement panel of double-pane glass cut to size. Walter tried to keep up with all of it. He kept walking from one work site to another, watching, and every time he opened his mouth to say something, the man working would nod respectfully and keep going, and Walter would close his mouth and walk to the next one. Cole watched him doing this from the porch, where he was coordinating supply runs on his phone. Marcus appeared beside Cole. He's trying to find a way to be useful, Marcus said. I know, Cole said. He's going to keep bouncing around until someone gives him a job. I know that too. Cole thought for a moment. Then he called out, Walter. Walter turned from where he'd been watching Cesar work on the foundation. I need someone to run the supply list, Cole said. Every team tells you what they need as they go. You track it and tell me when we need a run. Walter looked at him. He understood exactly what Cole was doing, giving him a real job, one that had real stakes, one that kept him at the center of it without making him feel like a bystander in his own yard. He was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened slightly. I can do that, he said. I know you can, Cole said. Walter went and found a legal pad from inside and came back out and took up a position on the porch steps, like a field commander. And within 30 minutes, every team was checking in with him when they needed something, and Walter was tracking it all with the focused precision of a man who had spent 50 years managing complex problems on limited resources. Some of the bikers figured out quickly that Walter Carter, behind the trembling hands and the worn flannel, was extremely sharp, that he asked exactly the right questions, anticipated needs before they were stated, and noticed discrepancies in supply counts that 3 other people had missed. Freya, coming down from the roof for a water break, said to Cole quietly, That old man could have run a battalion. He did, Cole said. Near enough. The morning moved. The work was loud and constant. Inside, Evelyn had converted the diner into a field kitchen and was running food out to the work teams on a rotation, and a woman named Rosa, the wife of one of the Great Falls riders, who had come along because Rosa went where she decided to go, and nobody had ever found a reason to argue, had taken over the coffee station and was running it with military precision. At 11:45, a county vehicle pulled into the lot. 2 men in it, both in official jackets. One of them was young and looked uncertain. The other was in his 50s and looked like a man who'd made a career out of looking certain even when he wasn't. He got out of the vehicle and stood looking at the work happening around him with an expression that moved through surprise and landed on displeasure. His name was Don Garrett, and he was the county building inspector, and within 30 seconds of his arrival, Cole knew exactly what kind of man he was. Whoever's in charge here, Garrett said loudly enough to be heard over the work noise. Cole came off the porch. He walked to Garrett and stopped at the right distance, close enough to be direct, far enough to be civil. That'd be me, he said. Garrett looked at the roof crew, looked at the foundation work, looked at the trucks. His expression said he had already decided several things. You have permits for any of this? Cole had been waiting for this question since yesterday. He had in fact been waiting for it since 2 a.m. 3 nights ago on a counter stool. He reached into his jacket and took out a folded set of documents. He handed them to Garrett. Residential repair permit filed yesterday morning. Roof and structural. County office opens at 8. We filed at 8:07. Garrett looked at the documents. Something shifted in his expression, the certainty recalibrating. This was filed yesterday. Is there a minimum filing window I missed? Cole asked. He kept his voice entirely neutral. Garrett looked up. He was not pleased. But the documents were real. Cole had driven to the county seat personally the previous day, which was why he hadn't arrived at the diner until this morning. Foundation work requires a separate structural permit, Garrett said. Page 3, Cole said. Garrett turned to page 3. He read it. His jaw tightened. The younger inspector beside him was now looking at the documents over Garrett's shoulder with an expression that suggested he found them entirely in order and was trying not to show it. The roofline modification on the north elevation, Garrett started, is a replacement in kind, Cole said. Same pitch, same material, same ridge elevation. No modification. Page 2, Section 4 exempts replacement in kind from the additional variance requirement. He paused. Per the county code that was revised in 2021, which you'd know. Garrett looked at him for a long moment. Cole looked at him. Neither of them moved. I'm going to need to see the contractor license for whoever's doing the structural, Garrett said. Cesar Ramirez, Cole said. Licensed in Montana and Wyoming. His credentials are attached as the last exhibit. The younger inspector actually turned away slightly, and Cole was fairly certain he was suppressing a smile. Garrett folded the documents and held them in one hand, like he was thinking about what to do with them. The work had not stopped around him. Men kept moving, kept building, kept going. The roof crew hadn't even paused. That was intentional. Cole had told everyone before they started, if someone in an official jacket shows up, you keep working unless I personally tell you to stop. You've done this before, Garrett said. It wasn't quite an accusation. I've had to, Cole said simply. Garrett looked at the diner. He looked at Walter on the porch steps with his legal pad. He looked at the crew. He looked at the permits again. Then he handed them back to Cole and said, I'll be checking back. We'll be here, Cole said. Garrett got back in his vehicle. The younger inspector got in on the passenger side and they pulled out of the lot. The work continued without a break in its rhythm. Nobody cheered. Nobody made a production of it. The men simply kept doing what they were doing because that was the point, not the confrontation, but the work. 30 feet away, Marcus let out a breath he'd apparently been holding since Garrett arrived. How did you know he'd come? Somebody called him, Cole said. Same somebody who called the sheriff 3 days ago. Marcus looked toward the road. The sheriff, or someone the sheriff told. Cole put the permits back in his jacket. Small towns have long telephones. Are you worried about it? Cole considered this seriously because Marcus was 27 and deserved a serious answer. I'm not worried about men who show up with clipboards when they could show up with something worse, he said. Clipboards mean they're looking for a legal reason to stop us, which means they don't have one yet. He looked at Marcus. Our job is to keep not giving them one. Marcus nodded. Then he said, what about the bank, the notice, the 31? 26, Cole corrected. 26 days now. He was quiet for a moment. That's the next problem. We fix what we can fix with our hands first. Then we deal with the part that takes something else. Marcus was quiet. What does that part take? Cole looked at the diner, at Walter on the porch steps, at Evelyn coming through the front door with a tray of food for the roof crew, moving around workers with that calm, unhurried efficiency of hers. Noise, Cole said. The right kind? He didn't explain further. He went back to his phone and made another call. This one lasted longer than the others. When he hung up, something in his expression had shifted, not softened exactly. Resolved, like a calculation that had been running for 3 days had finally produced an answer. The work went on through the afternoon. By 3 o'clock, the north roof section was stripped and half resheathed. The foundation crack had been routed, filled, and sealed with hydraulic cement that Cesar had mixed himself by hand by ratio from memory. The replacement window was in and sealed. The wiring in the back room was clean. 2 more issues had been found, a rotted sill plate under the east kitchen wall and a section of subfloor beneath the front service counter that had gone soft from years of the slow leak above it, and both had been added to Walter's list and addressed within the hour. At 4:15, Walter came to find Cole. He walked up beside him and stood there for a moment, and Cole waited because Walter was a man who organized his words before he used them. I need to tell you something, Walter said. All right, Cole said. Walter looked at the ground for a moment, then up. His hands were steady right now, which Cole had noticed happened when Walter was focused on something specific. 47 years ago, Walter said, I came home from Vietnam to nothing. No Tom, no support, nothing. I slept in my car for 11 days. He paused. 11 days. Then a man I'd never met offered me 3 days of work on his farm. Didn't ask about my history, didn't ask what I'd been through. Just said he needed help and I looked like I could give it. He stopped. Cole waited. I worked those 3 days, Walter said. And at the end, he paid me more than we'd agreed. When I told him it was too much, he said, Walter's voice changed slightly the way voices change when they're carrying someone else's words across a long distance. He said, you'll pass it on someday. That's payment enough for me. He looked at Cole. I've thought about that man almost every day since. I've tried to pass it on every way I knew how. This place, his voice caught slightly, then steadied. This place was my way of passing it on. Cole didn't say anything for a long moment. He stood beside the old man and looked at the diner and listened to the sounds of 60 men rebuilding it. Then he said quietly, I got fed once, long time ago. Someone opened a door when they didn't have to. He paused. I've been looking for a way to pass that on for 22 years. Walter turned and looked at him. Hadn't found the right door yet, Cole said. Walter's throat worked. He looked away. He pressed his lips together. He was not the kind of man who cried in front of people. And Cole was not the kind of man who made other men feel ashamed of almost crying, so he simply stood there beside him and let the moment be what it was. After a while, Walter said, the subfloor under the counter. Do your men know what they're doing with it? Brock does, Cole said. He'll have it solid by dark. Walter nodded. Good, he said. Then he went back to his legal pad and his position on the porch steps and his list, and Cole watched him go and thought about 26 days and thought about the call he'd made an hour ago and thought about noise, the right kind of noise. Because fixing the building was one thing. Fixing the building bought them time. But 26 days from now, if the bank still had a legal claim on this property, all of this would be someone else's building. And Cole had not driven 400 miles and brought 61 men and 11 trucks to build something for a bank. He had built it for Walter and for Evelyn and for the door that opened when it didn't have to. Everything else was still in front of him. But tonight, the roof would be whole. The pipes would hold. The heat would reach every corner, and 2 people in their 70s would sleep in their own home without the cold coming through the walls. Tonight, that was enough. Tomorrow, he would deal with the rest. Tomorrow came the way Cole had learned. Most important days do not announce, not dramatic, just suddenly present and requiring everything you had. He was up before 5. He had slept 4 hours on a cot that Marcus had found somewhere in the back of one of the work trucks, and 4 hours was enough because it had to be. He dressed in the dark, drank coffee, standing up in the diner kitchen, while Evelyn, who apparently did not sleep at all in the conventional sense, moved around him, making biscuits from memory without measuring anything. She hadn't said much to him since yesterday afternoon. Not because she was distant, the opposite. She had said very little because she was feeling too much, and Evelyn Carter Cole had learned in 3 days was a woman who went quiet when she was full. When she had things to say, she said them clearly and without hesitation. The silence meant something was sitting too deep for words yet. She put a plate of biscuits in front of him. He ate one. She refilled his coffee without being asked. How bad is it? She said. Her back was to him. She was rolling more dough. Cole set his cup down. The building or the other thing? You know which thing? She said. He had known this conversation was coming. He had been deciding since approximately 2 in the morning how to have it. There were 2 versions, the one that softened it and the one that gave her what she actually needed, which was the truth with enough information attached to be useful rather than just painful. He chose the second one. 26 days on the notice. The amount is $64,000, interest compounding daily. He paused. The building equity should exceed the debt, which means even in foreclosure, you'd theoretically walk away with something. But you'd lose the business, the property, everything you built. She kept rolling dough on. Her hands didn't stop. I know the numbers, Cole. I know you do. I kept them from Walter, she said. The real numbers. He knows we're behind. He doesn't know by how much. She paused in her rolling. He'd blame himself. He already blames himself for the medical bills, for the drought years, for things that were not his fault and were not anybody's fault. She started rolling again. He doesn't need another thing to carry that belongs to both of us. Cole was quiet for a moment. I think he knows more than you think he knows. She was still, just for a second. Then he always does, she said softly. That man has always known more than he lets on. There was something in her voice, not grief, exactly more like the specific tenderness of knowing someone completely. We've been protecting each other from the same truth for 6 months. Cole picked up his coffee. I made a call yesterday, he said. There's someone coming this morning, a woman named Claire Dunbar. She's an attorney out of Billings. She's done debt restructuring and foreclosure defense for 23 years. She owes me. He paused because saying she owes me wasn't precisely accurate, and accuracy mattered to him. She's agreed to come as a favor. She'll look at your loan documents and the foreclosure notice and tell you what your actual options are. Real options, not bank options. Evelyn turned around. She looked at him with those clear blue eyes that didn't have any performance in them, never had, not once in the 3 days he'd known her. Why are you doing all of this, she asked. And I want the real answer, not the version you give when someone asks and you don't want to go all the way down. Cole held her gaze. He thought about all the partial answers he could give, about paying forward, about brotherhood, about the right thing. All of them true, none of them the whole truth. When I was 24, he said, I was sleeping under an overpass in Knoxville in January. I had come back from the army with nothing and He stopped, found the word, gone. In the way that men go when they've been somewhere that takes the before version of themselves and doesn't give it back. He looked at his coffee cup. A woman came out of a diner and gave me soup. She didn't ask me anything. She didn't make me feel like a case. She just fed me and said there was more if I needed it. He looked up. I needed it. I went back 3 more times. By the time I found work, I was still standing. Because of her. He was quiet. I went back to thank her 6 months later. The diner was closed. Evelyn said nothing. I don't know her name, Cole said. I never will, but I know what she did, and I know what it cost her to do it because running a small diner in a hard town is not a wealthy life, and she gave it anyway. He looked at Evelyn directly. You opened your door in a hailstorm to 43 men most people cross the street to avoid. You didn't ask who we were. You asked who was hurt. He stopped. You are her. Do you understand me? You are exactly her. And I have been waiting 22 years to pay this back, and I am not going to miss it because you're too proud to let me. The kitchen was very quiet. Evelyn turned back to her dough. Her shoulders moved once slightly in the way shoulders move when someone is keeping something controlled that wants to be uncontrolled. Biscuits will be ready in 20 minutes, she said. Cole understood. He picked up his coffee and went to find Danny. Danny was already outside. He had been up even longer than Cole, apparently, and had been doing what Danny always did when he had thinking to work through something physical with his hands. He had found a section of split rail fence at the property edge that had collapsed, and he had spent the early morning resetting the posts and reattaching the rails with hardware he'd sourced from somewhere in the work trucks. Cole walked up beside him, and they stood together for a moment looking at the building. The roof was whole, the ridgeline was clean and straight. The northeast wall had solid foundation below it. The windows were sealed. From the outside, Rosie's lantern looked like what it had always wanted to be, a small, sturdy, permanent thing. Good work, Cole said. Good crew, Danny said. He drove a screw into the rail and checked it. You sleep. Some. I found something yesterday, Danny said. He said it the way he said everything level without preamble. When we were pulling up the subfloor section under the front counter, there's a space under there between the joist and the vapor barrier. Something wrapped in oilcloth. Cole looked at him. What kind of something? Metal box, locked. Military issue, best I can tell. Old. The kind they used for field documents in the 60s and 70s. He paused. I didn't open it. I put it back where it was. But you need to know it's there. Cole thought about this. About Walter. About 1968 and 1969. Does anyone else know? Just me. Leave it for now, Cole said. I'll talk to Walter. Danny nodded and drove another screw. Cole went back inside. Claire Dunbar arrived at 8:45 in a black SUV that had seen highway miles on it. She was 50, compact with short gray hair, and the energy of someone who had been formidable for a long time and was entirely comfortable with it. She shook Cole's hand, said, Tell me everything and leave nothing out. and sat down at the counter with a legal pad before she'd taken off her coat. Cole told her everything. The notice, the amount, the timeline, the loan structure, the property value. She wrote while he talked and asked 3 clarifying questions and did not react to anything emotionally, which was exactly what he needed from her. Walter came in from outside midway through. He stopped when he saw the woman at the counter with the legal pad. He looked at Cole. Cole said, "Walter, this is Claire Dunbar. She's here to look at your loan documents." Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Evelyn know about this?" "I do," Evelyn said, appearing from the kitchen doorway with the directness of a woman who had been listening through the door, which she clearly had been, and was not embarrassed about it. Walter looked at his wife, then at Claire, then at Cole. Something moved across his face, the pride and the need again fighting each other. But this time the need won faster, maybe because he was tired of the fight. Maybe because the roof was whole and the pipes were holding, and 60 men had spent yesterday rebuilding his walls, and something in him had shifted in the night into a place past the point of needing to carry it alone. "The documents are in the back office," he said. "I'll get them." Claire spent an hour with the documents. She read everything twice. She made notes. She asked Walter 4 specific questions about the loan origination date, the interest rate adjustment clauses, the county assessment history, and whether he had ever received written notice of the 2019 highway reroute's impact on assessed commercial value. Walter answered all 4 questions precisely and from memory. Claire looked up after the 4th answer. "Mr. Carter," she said, "the reroute of Route 9 in 2019 materially impacted the commercial value of this property. The bank's most recent assessment for the loan collateral review used the pre-reroute valuation. That is a significant discrepancy, and in Montana, that discrepancy has legal standing in a foreclosure defense." She paused. "Additionally, your original loan has an adjustable rate clause that was triggered in 2022 without the written notification required by your state's Lending Disclosure Act. I would need to verify the notification records, but if that notification wasn't properly documented..." She stopped. "Let it land." Walter stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means," Claire said carefully, "that this foreclosure may not be as airtight as the bank believes it is. It means there are grounds for challenge. Real grounds." The room was absolutely still. Evelyn sat down on the nearest stool. Not dramatically, her knees just made the decision before she did. Walter stood at the end of the counter with his trembling hands in his flannel shirt and his crew cut, and he looked at Claire Dunbar and said in a voice that was very careful, because it was carrying something very fragile, "Are you telling me we have a case?" "I'm telling you," Claire said, "that you have enough to make them uncomfortable, and sometimes that's the same thing." Cole was watching Walter's face. He saw the moment it happened, the thing that had been held rigid for months, maybe years, finally releasing. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was just the slow relaxation of a man's shoulders by a fraction of an inch, and the slight drop of his chin, and the movement in his throat. That was all. But Cole saw it, and he understood exactly what it meant. Walter turned and walked to the back hallway. He was gone for 2 minutes. When he came back, he had himself completely together and the legal pad under his arm, and he sat down next to Claire and said, "Tell me what you need from me." And they went to work. Cole went outside. He needed air, and he needed to think, and he needed a moment where nobody was looking at him, because he was running on 4 hours of sleep and 22 years of something that had finally started moving, and his own chest was doing something he wasn't going to examine in a public setting. Brock was sitting on the tailgate of one of the work trucks drinking from a thermos. He looked at Cole when Cole walked up and didn't say anything, which was the right call. After a moment, Cole said, "How's the crew holding up?" "Good," Brock said. "Better than good, actually. You know how it is when the work is real." Cole knew exactly how it was when the work was real. When it wasn't a beat, but a thing that mattered, and everybody in the crew knew it mattered. The quality was different. The focus was different. Men who did adequate work on ordinary days did extraordinary work on days that meant something. "There's one more thing," Cole said. Brock looked at him. "Under the subfloor, Danny found something, a military lockbox." He paused. "I need to talk to Walter about it, but I need to know first, when you pulled the subfloor section, was anything disturbed?" "Danny managed it," Brock said. "He was careful. He always is. I don't think Walter even knows it's there." Cole thought about that, about a man who buried a metal box under the floorboards of the place he built. About what you put in a box and bury under the floor of your life. About bronze stars and war letters and photographs and fallen friends. He went back inside. Claire and Walter were still working through documents. Evelyn was behind the counter present, but not intruding, refilling coffee when cups got low. Cole waited until there was a natural pause, Claire making a note. Walter looking something up, and then he said, "Walter, I need to show you something." Walter looked up. "Under the front counter," Cole said. "When we pulled the subfloor section, Danny found a box." The entire room stopped. Not dramatically. Just everything went very still, very fast. Walter's face did something complicated. A sequence of things too fast to follow that ended somewhere Cole hadn't expected. Not surprise. More like the expression of a man who has been waiting for something to surface that he had deliberately put somewhere deep and had almost convinced himself he had forgotten about. "What kind of box?" Walter said. His voice was careful in a different way now. "Military issue," Cole said. "Small, locked, wrapped in oilcloth." Walter set down the document in his hands. He was quiet for a very long moment. Evelyn was looking at her husband with an expression Cole couldn't read, like she was seeing something she had wondered about but never asked. "I thought the foundation had shifted," Walter said. "Years ago, I thought the ground movement might have—" He stopped, started again. "I put it there in 1987. Evelyn said quietly, "Walter. Some things," Walter said, "you put somewhere because you're not ready to carry them, but you're not ready to let them go." He looked at his wife. "I wasn't ready for a very long time." The silence in the room was the kind that had weight to it. Cole looked at Marcus, who was nearest the area of the counter where the subfloor had been repaired. "Can you bring it up?" he said. Marcus went to the counter, crouched, and felt along the repaired section of flooring where Danny had left a removable panel for access. He lifted it carefully. He reached down. He brought up a rectangular metal box the size of a shoebox wrapped in oilcloth that had darkened with age and was stiff when Marcus set it on the counter. It was locked with a small brass lock. The lock had oxidized but held. Cole looked at Walter. "Do you have the key?" Walter looked at the box for a long moment. Then he reached up and pulled the chain from around his neck, the one Cole had noticed that first night, without registering what it was, had filed it away the way he filed everything, just a chain, just a detail. On the chain, along with one other tag that was unmistakably military, was a small brass key. He took the key off the chain. He held it in his trembling hand, and he looked at it. "I haven't opened it since I locked it," he said. Evelyn came around the counter. She stood beside him. She put her hand on his arm, not holding him back, not urging him forward. Just there, the way she was always just there. Walter put the key in the lock. He turned it. It resisted 40 years of corrosion, and then it gave, and the lid came open. Inside, folded with the care of someone who had handled them knowing they were the last handling, were letters. A stack of photographs, black and white edges soft with age. And beneath those, in a small cloth pouch, a medal. Bronze. 5-pointed star. The kind they gave to men who did things in circumstances that civilians would spend their whole lives hoping they never had to imagine. Walter lifted the medal out of its pouch. He held it in his palm. His hand was shaking. He looked at it for a very long time. The room was full of men, big men, tough men, men who had between them enough combined history to fill volumes, and not one of them made a sound. Then Walter's composure broke. Not explosively, just a slow, final giving way of something that had been held too long. His head dropped forward. His shoulders shook once. He pressed his free hand over his mouth. Evelyn put her arm around him. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Cole stood on the other side of the counter and looked at the medal in Walter's palm and thought about 1968 and 1969 and what those years had asked of men and what those men had given, and how rarely anyone had said it was enough. How rarely anyone had said thank you in a way that reached the place where it needed to reach. Danny Hayes, who had been standing near the back of the room and had said nothing through any of this, walked forward. He came to the counter and stood across from Walter. He was a former Marine with quiet, dark eyes and a face that rarely showed anything, and right now it was showing something unambiguous. He reached across the counter and put his hand on Walter's forearm. Just that, just the hand. Walter looked up. He looked at Danny. Something passed between them that had no words, because some things that pass between certain men have no words and don't need them. Then Cole picked up one of the folded letters from the box. He looked at Walter. Do you want someone to read it? Walter straightened slowly. He wiped his face with one motion of his palm. He took the letter from Cole's hands. He unfolded it himself carefully with the particular care of a man handling something irreplaceable. He looked at the handwriting for a long moment. His name was Thomas Reyes, Walter said. His voice was rough but steady. We called him Tommy. He was from El Paso. He had a wife and a daughter he'd never met in person. He stopped. His throat worked. He asked me to make sure they got his letters if anything happened. He looked at the letter in his hands. I kept them instead. I didn't know how to go to them. I didn't know what to say. He looked up. I've lived with that for 57 years. The room breathed. Cole thought about what he was about to say before he said it because it mattered and he wanted it to be right. We can find them, he said. Tommy's daughter, if she's alive, his wife or her descendants. We can find them and you can give these letters to the people they were written for. He paused. If you want. Walter looked at him. The expression on his face was the most unguarded thing Cole had seen in 3 days, stripped of the careful management, the managed tremor, the flannel shirt dignity. Just a man 73 years old setting down something he'd carried since he was 16 years younger than Cole was now. Yes, Walter said, simply, without hesitation. Yes, I want that. Cole nodded. Then we'll find them, he said. I promise you that. He meant it. He knew how to find people. He had resources that surprised civilians and didn't surprise anyone in his world. He would find Tommy Reyes's daughter. He would make sure the letters reached the hands they were written toward. He would close that loop for Walter, even if it took him 6 months. But there was something else in the box, something Cole had seen when Walter lifted the metal out, but hadn't said anything about. A folded piece of paper at the very bottom, newer than the others. Not the same aged yellow, more like a document printed in the last 20 years, folded and put there deliberately and carefully. He waited until Walter had composed himself, until Evelyn had brought him coffee, until the room had come back to something like normal. Then Cole said, Walter, there's something else in the box. Walter looked. He reached in and lifted out the folded paper. He opened it. His eyes moved across it. And then something happened to his face that Cole was not prepared for. Walter started laughing. Not the polite kind, not the embarrassed kind. A real laugh, rough and surprised and genuine, the kind that comes from somewhere you didn't know still had anything left in it. Evelyn stared at him. Walter, what? It's the deed, Walter said. He held it up. His hand was shaking, but his voice was clear now and strong. The original deed to the property. The one I thought I'd lost in the 2009 flood. He looked at Cole. Do you understand what this is? Without this document, the bank had a discrepancy in the title chain. Claire. He looked at the attorney. Is it the original deed? Claire was already leaning forward. She took the document from Walter's hands with the focused attention of someone who had just seen something shift. She read it again. She looked up. Mr. Carter, she said, and her voice had changed, had the particular controlled energy of a professional who has just seen a case change shape. With this document, the title chain is complete and unambiguous, which means the bank's claim on the collateral depends entirely on their loan origination documents. And given what you've told me about the rate adjustment notification, she stopped, made herself slow down. This significantly improves your position. The room had gone very quiet again, but it was a different quality of quiet this time. Not the weight of grief, the held breath of something turning. Walter looked at the deed in Claire's hands, then at Cole, then at Evelyn. Then he did something Cole had not seen him do once in 3 days. He smiled. A full, real, unmanaged smile, the kind that makes a person look 20 years younger, and looked at his wife and said, Evelyn, we might be all right. Evelyn pressed both hands over her face. Her shoulders shook once. Then she straightened and looked at her husband and said in the most matter-of-fact voice she could manage, which was not very matter-of-fact at all, I told you we weren't gone yet, Walter. Cole turned away from both of them and looked at the window. He needed a moment. He was not going to take it in front of 60 people, so he looked at the window and breathed and let the moment finish its business inside him privately. Then Marcus appeared at his elbow, 27 years old, the readable face. Cole, he said. Yeah. The sheriff's outside, Marcus said. Cole turned from the window. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the lot through the glass where Sheriff Roy's cruiser had pulled up, and the man himself was standing beside it, not moving toward the building, just standing, watching. Cole put on his jacket. He looked at Walter, who was talking to Claire with the deed in his hands and the animation of a man who had been given something back. He looked at Evelyn, who was watching her husband with tears still at the edges of her eyes, and something in her posture that had shifted from the careful holding on of the past 6 months to something looser, less braced. Then he walked to the door and went outside to deal with the next thing, because there was always a next thing. And Cole Mercer had never once in his life walked away from one. Sheriff Roy Daniels was leaning against the hood of his cruiser with his arms crossed when Cole came out. He wasn't reaching for anything. He wasn't moving toward the building. He was just standing there in the cold with that particular stillness of a man who has been thinking about something long enough that he stopped being angry about it and started being uncertain, which is a different thing entirely. Cole walked to within 10 feet of him and stopped. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The sounds of the work crews behind Cole filled the silenced power tools, men calling to each other, the steady rhythm of things being made solid. "You want to tell me what you're actually here for," Cole said. Not aggressive, just direct. Daniels looked at him. "I've been sheriff of this county for 19 years, he said. You know how many times in 19 years the county building office has called me to complain about construction work? How many never, Daniels said. Garrett called me this morning. Said you had permits he couldn't argue with, and he wanted me to..." He stopped. His jaw moved. He wanted me to find a reason. Cole looked at him steadily. "Did you find one?" Daniels was quiet. He looked past Cole at the building, at the clean new ridgeline, at the men moving with purpose, at Walter on the porch steps with his legal pad tracking the work like a field commander who had found his post again. "No," he said, "I didn't find one." He paused. "I wasn't really looking." Cole waited. "I owe Evelyn Carter an apology," Daniel said. "What I said in there 3 days ago, the way I said it." He looked at Cole directly now, and what was in his face was not the calculating expression of a man managing a situation. It was something plainer. "I've known Walter and Evelyn for 16 years. I used to eat here twice a week before the highway moved. I knew about the foreclosure notice. I knew for 2 months. He stopped. His voice had changed register. "I didn't do anything." Cole looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you telling me?" "Because you came back," Daniel said. 60-something men and a convoy of work trucks, and I've been standing here for 20 minutes trying to figure out how a group of Hell's Angels did in 3 days what this entire county didn't do in 6 months. He paused. "And I think I know the answer, and I don't like what it says about us." Cole said nothing. He let that sit where it had landed. "What do you need from me?" Daniel said. It was the right question. Cole had learned over 22 years that the value of an adversary who has changed his mind depends entirely on what they're willing to do once they change it. Words were nothing. Movement was everything. "Garrett's going to keep looking for a reason to shut this down," Cole said. "I need someone in the county structure who can make sure the permit process doesn't develop any sudden complications." "I can make some calls," Daniel said. "There's also a matter with the bank," Cole said. "Oh." "Claire Dunbar's in there right now with loan documents that have some irregularities. I need those irregularities to get proper attention from the right people in the next 26 days. Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Claire Dunbar from Billings. You know her. She put 3 mortgage companies through regulatory hell back in 2018, Daniel said. They settled out of court all 3 times, he paused. If she sees irregularities, they're real. They're real, Cole confirmed. Daniels pushed off his cruiser hood and straightened. He was quiet for a moment, the way men are quiet when they're making a decision that's going to cost them something. In his case, Cole understood it was going to cost him a comfortable relationship with the county bureaucracy and probably with Garrett specifically, because men like Garrett had long memories for people who stopped being useful to them. All right, Daniel said. He extended his hand. Cole looked at it for just a moment, then he shook it. Firm, brief, no ceremony. I'm going to need to apologize to Evelyn, Daniel said. Yes, Cole said, you are. Daniels nodded and walked toward the diner. Cole turned and went back to work. What happened next moved fast. That was the thing about momentum. Once it started, once the direction was clear, and enough people were moving in it, it stopped being something you managed and became something you rode. Claire spent the afternoon on the phone with a contact at the Montana Department of Financial Institutions. She was precise and relentless in the way that made financial institutions deeply uncomfortable, which was why she'd spent 23 years being good at this specific thing. By 4 o'clock, she had a formal inquiry open against the bank's lending practices in 3 counties with the Carter loan as the primary exhibit. The bank's legal department, she told Walter, would have a response to the inquiry before they could proceed with any foreclosure action. That response would take time, more time than 26 days. Walter sat at the counter and listened to this and didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Then he said, "How much time?" "At minimum 60 days for the response window," Claire said. "More likely 90, during which period the foreclosure action is stayed." She paused. "And that's before we get to the discovery process for the rate adjustment notification failure." Walter looked at his hands. The tremor was there, the one that didn't leave, but his face was steady. 90 days, he said. "That's enough time." "For what?" Claire asked. "To figure out the rest," Walter said. He looked at her. "We've survived worse than 90 days. Cole heard that from across the room and felt something in his chest that he was going to continue not naming in public. By 5 o'clock, the work outside had reached a point that Brock called completion, which for Brock meant every identified structural issue was addressed, every repair was solid, and every material had been used for the purpose it was brought for. The roof was whole, the foundation was sealed, the wiring was clean, the pipes were holding, the window was sealed, the subfloor was new, the building that had been quietly dying was not dying anymore. Cole stood in the lot and looked at it. He was tired in the way he got tired after things that mattered, not the physical exhaustion, though that was present, but the deeper kind, the kind that came from carrying something concentrated for days and then being able to set it down. Marcus appeared beside him. He was looking at the building too. "It looks different," he said. "Buildings look different when they're cared for," Cole said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What do we do about Tommy Reyes's family?" Cole had already started on it. He had a man, a quiet, careful man named Spencer, who was not part of the club, but who had done contract investigation work for Cole for 11 years, running the search from Billings. El Paso. Thomas Reyes. Wife, 1 daughter, never met in person. 1968. It was enough to start with. Spencer had found people with less. "Working on it," Cole said. "In the bank. Claire's handling it. And Garrett Assassin. Daniels is handling it." Marcus looked at him. "You set all of this up before you even got here this morning, didn't you?" Cole didn't answer that, which was its own answer. Marcus shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, in something more like wonder. "You know what Freight called you this morning?" "I don't want to know." "He said you're the most dangerous kind of person," Marcus said. "The kind that plans like a general but shows up like a neighbor." Cole looked at him flatly. Marcus almost smiled. "I think he meant it as a compliment." "Go find something useful to do by him," Cole said. Marcus went grinning. The crews began packing up at 6. It was efficient and organized because these were men who did not waste motion tools going back into cases, cases going into trucks, tarps being folded and strapped. There was conversation and there was laughter, and there was the particular warmth of men who have done good work together and know it. Evelyn came out onto the porch. She watched the packing for a moment. Then she called out loud enough to carry across the lot, "Nobody leaves before they eat." Several men looked at each other. One of them, Freight, said, "Ma'am, there's 60 of us." "I know how many there are," Evelyn said. "I've been cooking since 2 o'clock. Get in here." Nobody argued. It took 3 seatings to get 60 men through the diner, and Evelyn ran all 3 of them with the same calm efficiency she had applied to everything for 3 days. Rosa helped. Marcus helped. A few of the other men ended up behind the counter without being asked, passing plates and refilling water and doing the small logistical work that keeps a large group fed. The food was what it always was in Evelyn's kitchen, simple, real, and made with the kind of attention that people can taste even when they can't name it. Walter sat at the end of the counter for all 3 seatings. He ate a little. Mostly he watched. He had the expression of a man taking inventory of something he had almost lost and was now counting very carefully the way you count things when you understand what their absence would cost. Daniel stayed. He sat in a booth and ate stew and said very little, and nobody made an issue of his presence, and he didn't make an issue of anyone else's. When Evelyn came to refill his coffee, he said, "I'm sorry, Evelyn, for what I said, for the months before that." Evelyn poured his coffee. She looked at him for a moment. Roy, she said, you've been eating at this counter for 16 years. That counts for something. She paused. Don't let it be 16 more years before you come back. Daniels nodded. He looked at his cup. I won't, he said. It was a small moment. But the whole evening was small moments strung together into something large, and Cole understood that this was how things actually changed, not in single dramatic shifts, but in the accumulation of small corrections, each one almost imperceptible until the direction was different. Cole was sitting at his counter stool, his stool the one he'd occupied for 3 days, the one at the far end where he could see the whole room when his phone buzzed. He looked at it. Spencer. He stepped outside to take the call. Spencer was precise and brief because Cole had trained him to be both. He had found a Maria Reyes Caldwell in El Paso, Texas. 71 years old, her mother had been Elena Reyes née Gutierrez, who had died in 2018. Her father, Thomas Reyes, killed in action Vietnam, November 1969. She had grown up with a photograph of him, but no letters, no personal effects beyond the official notification, and a flag folded at burial that had been 3 years delayed. She was a retired school teacher. She had 3 grandchildren. Cole stood outside in the cold and listened to all of this and said nothing until Spencer was done. Then he said, Does she know about the letters? She doesn't know they exist, Spencer said. Cole was quiet for a moment. Get me her number, he said. I'll call her myself. Spencer was quiet for just a second, the briefest pause of a professional who has learned not to express surprise at what his clients do. I'll send it now, he said. Cole hung up. He stood outside with the cold coming off the valley and his phone in his hand and thought about a woman who was 71 years old and had grown up without a father and without his words and had built a full life from that absence and still in some room of herself, had been waiting. He thought about Walter inside with the tremor in his hands who had carried those letters for 57 years because he didn't know how to deliver them and couldn't let them go. 2 people on opposite ends of a gap that had never closed because the bridge between them had no builder. Until now. He went back inside. He found Walter at the counter, the room quieter now, the last seating finishing up. He sat down on his stool. He put his phone on the counter, face down. I found her, he said. Walter went very still. He didn't ask who. He knew exactly who. Her name is Maria, Cole said. She lives in El Paso. She's 71. She's a retired school teacher. He paused. She never knew the letters existed. Walter pressed his hand flat on the counter. He breathed. She's good, Walter, Cole said. She built a good life, 3 grandchildren. He watched the old man's face. She has a photograph of her father, but nothing in his words. Nothing that tells her who he was. He paused. You can give her that. You're the only person in the world who can. Walter was quiet for a very long time. Evelyn had come to stand behind him at the counter, and she put her hand on his shoulder and left it there. I'll call her, Walter said. He stopped, started again. I need a day to think about what to say. Take all the time you need, Cole said. She's waited 57 years. A day won't change anything. Walter nodded. He picked up his coffee cup with both trembling hands and held it and didn't drink from it. Then something happened that Cole was not expecting. Walter looked at him directly with those eyes that had seen 1968 and 1969 and 47 years of hard farming and 2 years of medical bills and 6 months of a foreclosure clock and 3 days of 60 strangers rebuilding his walls. And he said, Who was she? Cole looked at him. Who? The woman in Knoxville, Walter said. The one who fed you. Cole held his gaze. A long moment passed. I don't know, he said. I never knew her name. Walter nodded slowly. I think, he said, that she would be very glad to know what came from it. Cole said nothing. He looked down at the counter. He was not going to respond to that out loud in public on this stool at this counter. He was going to sit with it in the private room where he kept things that were true and too large for conversation. The evening wound down. Men drifted out in ones and twos, pausing to shake Walter's hand or nod to Evelyn. And Evelyn pressed food into their hands for the road because that was who she was, and nothing was going to change that. Cole watched all of it from his stool. Marcus was the last of the crew inside. He stopped beside Cole on his way to the door. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Are you coming? Cole looked around the diner, at the repaired ceiling, the clean walls, the new window that sealed the cold outside. The counter where Walter was talking to Daniels in a low voice with the deliberate engagement of two men starting a conversation that was long overdue. The kitchen doorway where Evelyn was moving through her closing routine, washing down surfaces with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose house is whole again. In a few minutes, Cole said. Marcus nodded and went out. The door closed. The diner went quiet in the way small places go quiet at the end of a day, not empty, just settled. Cole sat at his stool. He thought about a night in Knoxville, January 22 years ago, when a woman had come out of a diner with soup and said there was more if he needed it. He thought about all the years between that night and this one, all the roads, all the miles, all the things he had done and not done and tried to do and failed at and tried again. He thought about the ways a person spends 22 years trying to find the right door to walk back through. He had walked through it. He sat at the counter of Rosie's lantern, and he let that be true without qualifying it or reducing it or moving on from it too fast. He let it be exactly what it was, which was the end of something long and the beginning of something he hadn't named yet. Walter looked up from his conversation with Daniels. He looked at Cole. He said nothing. He just looked at him with those eyes that had seen everything and forgotten nothing, and then he nodded once, the particular nod of a man acknowledging something that doesn't need words, because words would only make it smaller. Cole nodded back. Then he got off his stool, put on his jacket, and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back one more time at Rosie's lantern, at the warm light, at the people inside it, at the counter, where he'd spent 3 days becoming certain that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 3 weeks later, the bank withdrew the foreclosure action. Claire Dunbar sent Cole a text that said 2 words. They blinked. He read it sitting on his bike in a parking lot in Billings and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight since the first night. 3 weeks after that, Walter called Maria Reyes Caldwell in El Paso. The call lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. Walter told Cole later, without elaborating, that she had cried, and he had cried, and at the end, she had asked if she could come to Montana to receive the letters in person. Walter had said yes before she finished the sentence. Evelyn had booked the guest room that same afternoon. 1 month after the storm, Rosie's lantern reopened. Not just reopened with the kind of presence a place earns when the people who love it show up to say so. Farmers came, truckers came, families drove from 2 counties over. Veterans from the VFW post 40 miles up the road came in a caravan because word had gotten to them about Walter's Bronze Star and about what the bikers had done and about the metal box under the floorboards, and they came because that is what veterans do when one of their own has been seen. Daniels came. Garrett did not, but that was all right. And 61 Hells Angels motorcycles lined the road outside like the world's most unexpected honor guard, their engines quiet, their riders standing, and the whole impossible, improbable, beautiful thing was real and present and not going anywhere. Walter hung a sign above the door that he had made himself in the weeks between the repair and the reopening, working on it in the back room in the evenings with the slow care of a man making something he intends to last. 4 words carved into a piece of barnwood from the property, painted white so they'd show in the dark. Everybody eats during the storm. Cole stood outside and read those words and thought about the woman in Knoxville one last time. He thought about soup in January and an open door and a voice that said, "There's more if you need it." He thought about how a single act of grace moves through time in ways the person who gives it will never fully see rippling out through years and miles and people they will never meet, changing things they will never know were changed. He thought about Walter Carter, who had passed something on for 37 years from a diner at the edge of a forgotten highway, and about how that passing on had reached all the way to a parking lot in Knoxville and a young broken man who needed it and took it and carried it forward for 22 more years until he found the right door. He thought about how none of this had been an accident. Not the storm, not the road, not the hailstorm on Route 9, not the amber light visible through the rain at 200 feet. He didn't believe in accidents. He never had. He believed in doors. He believed in the people who opened them. He believed in the long, slow, invisible chain of grace that runs through ordinary lives and holds everything together in the places where nothing else will. In the storms that come without warning on the highways nobody uses anymore in the towns that everybody forgot. He believed that the most powerful thing a person can do is open their door. And he believed with everything in him, without reservation, without qualification, standing outside Rosie's lantern on a cold Montana night with the sound of music and voices coming through the walls, and 60 motorcycles parked in a row, and a wooden sign glowing in the light above the door, that what had happened in this place would outlast all of them. The storm had passed, the door was open, and the lantern was burning bright.